This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 659 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Some people think strength of schedule analysis is stupid, but I disagree. What matters is how you use the analysis, how much you weigh the analysis when you're drafting players. Is strength of schedule everything? Of course not. It's not even everything when we're projecting player performance within a single game. But analyzing strength of schedule can be helpful, and has been helpful for me in the past. I do this episode each year. Instead of looking at full season strength of schedule, where a lot can change as the season goes on, like injuries and such, I focus the analysis on the beginning part of the season. That's because of a couple of reasons. Number one, everyone is healthy right now. Well, most players are. So when we're analyzing these matchups, we have a decent idea of who's playing. Number two, having your fantasy assets get off to a good start, that's important. If there's a running back who's projected to face a really tough game script over and over again during the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, and if that running back then does poorly, you're going to start doubting that running back. He's not only going to lose value within your fantasy league, but you're also going to wonder if the back himself, if he's the one who's not able to perform, or if it was just matchup based. And you don't want that. You'd much rather have a player who dominates right away. But again, I'm not saying this type of analysis is everything. I'm just saying it's an input. It's something to think about when you're drafting your team. It's information. Information that you can use to be a more well-rounded fantasy manager. Now, before looking at these situations, I want to let you know about the Establish the Run draft kit. Establish the Run has rankings for any fantasy format that you might be playing in, and they continuously update as news breaks. You also get access to Evan Silva's top 150, and along with it, a change log that you can read to see why players are moving up and down his draft board. It's a great way to make sure you understand why players are ranked where they are. The goal is to help you make better decisions, not tell you who to pick. And if you're into best ball drafting, their strategy rankings and insight can help you out a ton with roster construction. I know that I've learned a lot through their analysis. Establish the Run gives you a different perspective on fantasy football than I do. And I think the combination of my work and theirs can help make this draft season a successful one. So head over to establishedrun.com right now and purchase their draft kit. And when you do, use promo code JJ for a 10% discount. That's promo code JJ. Also, don't forget to sign up for FanDuel Fantasy. For users who have yet to make a deposit on FanDuel Fantasy, you can deposit today to receive 2 free entries. All you have to do is deposit a minimum of $10 in your FanDuel DFS account, and you'll be instantly rewarded with 2 free vouchers. Be sure to deposit now and play for free. Head over to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel Fantasy app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. I'm going to start things off today by looking at some good early season schedules. And then we'll close out the show by looking at some bad ones. One thing that's helped me in the past with this analysis is using Pro Football Focus's rankings. They do such in-depth work with player analysis that with so many moving parts around NFL teams during the offseason, it gives me a nice baseline for the analysis. It gives me an objective way to view all of this. I also like using FanDuel Sportsbook's numbers for win totals because they can help tell us if a team has an opponent that's supposed to be good or not, and that can impact game script. I use those tools to give me a reference to then investigate the schedules a little bit further. And after doing all of that analysis, I've got 5 things to watch out for on the favorable side early on in the season. There are conflicting reports out there right now as to how the Broncos are going to split up their backfield this year. As we know, we saw a huge split in 2021, but with Melvin Gordon signing back with Denver pretty late and Javonte Williams not being a rookie anymore, some have thought that Williams will be the primary runner this year. Cecil Lammey, who's very connected to the Broncos, he thinks that there's no running back competition between Gordon and Williams, and that Williams will be their lead back. But Benjamin Albright, who's also connected to Denver, said that the running back split looks like it's going to be pretty even once again. Regardless, Denver's opening schedule is pretty sweet. Technically for the passing attack too. But when looking at the first 2 games in the season and looking at the game lines over on FanDuel Sportsbook, no team has a larger cumulative spread than the Broncos in weeks 1 and 2. What I mean by that is they're 5.5 point favorites against Seattle in week 1, and then they're 10.5 point favorites against Houston in week 2, which makes sense because Seattle and Houston aren't projected to be very good in 2022. What that means is that we could see a really nice positive game script for this offense and these running backs. So so Javonte could eat, but Melvin Gordon could gain some value after a couple of weeks in the season as well. And the matchups through the air shouldn't be a concern either. Seattle, their first opponent, they're 30th in Pro Football Focus's secondary rankings this year, and Houston is 32nd. So this offense should feast early on. They really don't face a tough secondary until about week 6. So this is all another reason to be bullish on this Russell Wilson-led Broncos team. We might see Cam Akers get off to a nice fantasy start too. The Rams get the Bills in week 1, and over on FanDuel Sportsbook, that game has the highest total on the slate, on that week 1 slate. That could lead to scoring opportunities, which then would help Cam Akers. Week 2 is a matchup against the Falcons. The Rams in that game, according to FanDuel Sportsbook, are 13-point favorites. This could very quickly calm our nerves about Akers' lack of efficiency in the playoffs. And after the Falcons, they get Arizona, San Francisco, and Dallas, 3 games where we could see a high game total. So I think Akers in particular deserves a shout on this show. Another running back who's in an interesting position, Nick Chubb. We have no idea how long Deshaun Watson's going to be suspended, at least at the time of this recording. But I'm sure most people aren't excited about the Browns offense to start the year, since that would be the time frame for when Watson's out. Fortunately, they've got a really nice early season schedule. Their first 4 games of the season, they're against teams that have no more than a 7.5 win total. They get the Panthers, Jets, Steelers, and Falcons to start the season. So if there's more of a neutral game script for Cleveland, there's a better chance that we see more Nick Chubb. So despite this looming Deshaun Watson suspension, Chubb could get off to a decent start in fantasy. When I looked at the first 2 weeks of games over on FanDuel Sportsbook, I totaled each team's team total for their first 2 games. And the usual suspects were at the top of the list. The Rams had the highest first 2-week team total in the league, then Buffalo, Kansas City, you had the Chargers, the Packers, Dallas, and then Tampa Bay. No one should be shocked by that. Those are all very good offenses. But do you know who was next? The Indianapolis Colts. The Colts start their season against the Texans and then the Jags. 2 very winnable games, hence the high team total. They then get the Chiefs in week 3, which could be higher scoring as well. So yeah, Jonathan Taylor should feast to start the year. But I think feeling good about the entire offense makes plenty of sense. So Matt Ryan could even work as an early season streamer, though I wouldn't recommend entering your fantasy season with quarterback streaming being top of mind. And then the last situation and player to call out is surprisingly someone I sort of talked down on last week's mailbag episode, and he's someone I generally am not into this year, but it's Antonio Gibson. Over the first 2 weeks of the season, according to FanDuel Sportsbook, the Commanders are actually favorites because they get Jacksonville and Detroit. Considering their win total is 8.5 this season, we may not get a whole lot of situations where they're favorites. And who benefits from those positive game scripts? I mean, technically the whole offense will benefit. Washington actually has a middle-of-the-road team total over the first 2 weeks, but a player like Gibson could see more work than usual if things go as planned. And then someone like Brian Robinson could be a sneaky, deeper play as well. It doesn't look like we're going to see J.D. McKissic as much to start the season for Washington. Now let's look at the flip side, or teams in situations that may struggle to start the season because of their matchups. Atlanta's going to be bad this year. We know this. But to add insult to injury, they get the Saints and the Rams in weeks 1 and 2. According to PFF, those are 2 top 10 secondaries entering the season. The Falcons, in turn, have a 36-point team total in the first 2 weeks combined, according to FanDuel Sportsbook. That's tied for the second lowest in football. Hopefully we see something from Drake London right away, and I'm still drafting him heavily. But I wouldn't get overly excited about what he might do in tough matchups in weeks 1 and 2. Tua Tagovailoa could be in some trouble too. The Patriots are their opponent in week 1, and their secondary isn't what it used to be. Even still, we know that they can scheme well, and that's obviously a concern, as is the fact that it's a divisional game. But even when you factor in New England's 26th ranked secondary, right after that game, Miami gets Baltimore, Buffalo, and Cincinnati, 3 teams with top 10 pass defenses entering the league according to PFF. And over their first 2 games, the Dolphins have a bottom half projected team total. Maybe those games end up shooting out because some of those offenses that they're facing are good. But I do think that you should at least know that Tua is highly volatile to start the year. Another quarterback in a not great spot to start the season, Zach Wilson. The Jets have it rough during the first half of the season, guys. Let me just read you their opponent's PFF secondary ranking by week, all the way up to their week 10 bye. You ready for this? 1, 3, 10, 28. So that's a good matchup, but it's the Steelers, so maybe they can pressure him enough. 5, 4, 12, 26, and 6. That's 9 games, and 6 of those 9 games are against teams with top 10 pass defenses. Of course, that's not the end all, but it is a little bit scary. The Jets' playoff schedule is nice for fantasy, but the front half is rough. They could be a team to target at your trade deadline. And then the final player situation that I want to call out is David Montgomery. We don't know exactly how this new offense is going to split the backfield, but the Bears are tied with the second lowest team total over the first 2 weeks of the season, according to FanDuel Sportsbook. And they're pretty big underdogs against both San Francisco and Green Bay during those games. They do get the Texans in week 3, so a player like Montgomery could get back on track there, but if game script does get out of hand, you have to at least have some worry about how that can impact David Montgomery. I actually have a little bit of worry about the Bears in general during those first 2 weeks. But again, week 3 against Houston should get things back on track if they do indeed start slow. Now, just to reiterate what I've been saying, don't solely use this analysis to make your decisions. That's not the intent. This is just additional information to think about when you're drafting. Because there are going to be times where you may need some sort of tiebreaker in your draft, and this can help with that. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you just subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Remember to check out lateround.com. Go ahead and purchase the draft guide, join the Patreon, all that good stuff. Thanks for listening. Really, really appreciate it. I'll talk to you later in the week.